ni hao, xin dao, or whatever else your greeting of choice may be from an unusually overcast morning here in Haiphong, Vietnam. This is ostensibly just a little update video on my goals for the year. More specifically, I have some news I want to share about my goal race, which is something that I didn't have any concrete plans for coming into 2024. That lack of a concrete goal race may have been one of the biggest factors behind my recent summer marathon training imploding so badly once the going got tough. It really is hard to overstate the importance of having something to work towards when it comes to motivation. In fact, if anyone watched my fourth video, I think it was, where I laid out my plans for the year, I said I was thinking of maybe running my marathon this year as a trail race, probably here in Vietnam. While that was certainly true at the time, the closer we got to moving, I think the more obvious it became that maybe 2025 was going to have to be the year of the trail race, and 2024 was going to have to make do with a plain, boring old road marathon. One of the big reasons for that is that moving is stressful and expensive, and looking after a 2-year-old is stressful and expensive. And running a trail race here in Vietnam would have involved traveling probably somewhere quite far away from Haiphong. What with all the hassle and planning and organization that would entail, I kind of decided it would be better to wait off until we were settled. The other upshot of that is that if we do it next year, traveling with a 3-year-old is going to be a lot more pleasant, I think, than traveling with a 2-year-old. And we're going to have a far easier time of turning it into a nice little family holiday than if we did it now. Alright, just gonna stop for a sec. Another big reason I ended up plumping for a road marathon is that when I was looking for races in Vietnam, I discovered that Haiphong has its own marathon, and it just so happens to take place in December. Part of a very small window where conditions are conducive to running, where the goal is not to die of dehydration and heat exhaustion halfway around. Honestly, the timing was just too good, and the fact that the race is taking place here in our own backyard means that we can avoid the hassle of travel. It also means we can avoid the expense. That, and the fact that it would be quite nice to take part in my hometown marathon. Doing that as my first race after moving to Vietnam, or well, second actually, but more on that later. Doing that as my first marathon since moving to Vietnam feels kind of fitting. And so, drum roll please, I have signed up to take part in the Haiphong Marathon, which is set to take part in the early hours of the 15th of December 2024. And that is the news that I wanted to share in this video. Another day, another coffee shop. Post-run beverage is a coconut coffee. Lovely. I gotta be honest, I don't really know what this stuff is. I think it might be coconut ice cream and coffee, or coconut oil and sugar, and I don't really know. It tastes like it's basically coconut ice cream and coffee. It's basically a coconut coffee milkshake, and I am all here for it. Okay, so I forgot to mention this out on the run, but another big factor in me deciding to run a conventional road marathon at the end of this year is that I found myself in far better shape going into this summer than I expected. I think I may have mentioned this too in my original video on goals for this year, but we always knew that 2024 was going to involve a lot of upheaval. What with us transitioning from our settled lives in Shanghai to entirely different surroundings here in Haiphong. And I had accepted pretty early on that all this disruption was going to have a big impact on my running, which obviously isn't the highest priority in our lives. So naturally, I figured that I wasn't going to be pumping out huge miles and making massive gains. And I wasn't expecting to be in any sort of a condition to be challenging for a new marathon PB. In that light, with no real time target to aim for, it made sense to run a trail race where I could ignore time pressure and experience something new before focusing my efforts on training for a PB in 2025. But then I started really optimizing my time, running into work in the mornings and hitting record mileage. And I finally started getting back to and even surpassing my pre-Shanghai marathon levels of fitness before the dreaded COVID really pulled a number on me. It became clear to me that I was on track for huge PB form if I could keep my consistency and levels of training running through the summer and autumn and into marathon season. And sure, I had a couple of months in July and August that weren't great, but I did keep still ticking the engine over. It wasn't like previous struggles with illness, COVID or lockdowns, where I maybe had to take out a month or a few weeks just completely off running and then build up having lost fitness in the meantime. So while I stalled a little bit in the summer after I made the decision to take on the Haiphong Marathon, now that we're settled and that I have a treadmill at home and we're back into proper training, things are going really well. I'm not quite at the levels of mileage and consistency that I was at the beginning of the year, but I still think I'm well on course of beating my current marathon PB of 3 hours, 19 minutes and 14 seconds. Now, as to exactly how fast I can go, it's really hard to tell right now. I'm doing most of my running on a treadmill that isn't calibrated properly, and the rest outside in temperatures that are hovering around about 30 degrees, mostly over 30 degrees. So all of my training times and effort data, heart rate and that sort of thing is very much skewed by the conditions. Usually, especially when I start marathon training in the summer, I only really get an idea of where I'm at once we hit October and things start to cool down and I can consistently go and run outside in normal temperatures. And well, while it's October here, it's not quite the same as in Shanghai. It's still very hot, and I might have to wait until November or possibly even December until things cool down enough for me to really be able to gauge my potential level of performance. But I am at least tentatively optimistic that I should be able to get into shape to possibly break under 3 hours and 10 minutes, which would be a big step in getting to sub 3. Be 10 minutes off my PB, and yeah, something that I would be really proud of. But I should just reiterate that that is an educated guess, and a fairly poorly educated one at that. Like I say, it's hard to go off the data I currently have, and I'm really just sort of basing this on past experience, the mileage that I'm hoping to get, and maybe more than just a little bit of optimism. Alright, back home. I said training is going well, and I'm tentatively optimistic. Although this week is going terribly, but that's because I'm full of virus, and hopefully this won't last too long. However, as my past experiences have taught me, being in shape to run fast at the end of training and actually turning up on the start line and running fast can be two very, very different things. Out of my 4 marathons so far, only one of them has gone to plan. In my first marathon, I crashed and burnt badly due to the heat and humidity. In my second, I arrived at the start line having lost a lot of fitness during my taper, which has been a recurring theme for me in my running journey thus far. In my third, I was in the shape of my life at the beginning of my taper, targeting a 3:10 marathon for the first time. But then the fitness mysteriously evaporated again, and I was running slower times than I had done in training for a much, much higher heart rate. In the end, despite slowing down to what would have been zone 2 pace just 2 or 3 weeks earlier, now with a zone 4 heart rate, I crashed badly at around 32 kilometers and just about managed to crawl home in under 4 hours. So while I think it's an attainable goal to get into 3:10 shape, I know that even if training goes perfectly, conditions, illness, the accursed taper, and all manner of other things could still throw a spanner in the works. I can't do too much about illness, and having a kid in preschool means that I am going to be ill pretty much all of the time, and I certainly can't do anything about the weather either, but I did reduce the length of my taper before my PB last year, and I felt much, much better for it. As such, I'm planning on doing the same thing again and going for a much shorter taper, and I guess we'll see if that's something that works for me or if it just turned out to be a fluke last year. At the moment, the heat is the thing that's worrying me the most. Having checked, the average daily high for December in this part of Vietnam is in the low 20s. From what I can tell, the race kicks off at 4 o'clock in the morning, so it should be over well before we get to the hottest part of the day. And hopefully, that'll mean conditions are unlikely to be absolutely horrific, even if it does end up being slightly warmer than ideal. But as to what actually happens on race day, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Alright, one last little update before I take some cold and flu medicine and then fire up the treadmill to try and suffer through a long run. In preparation for December's marathon, I've signed up for a half marathon next month in Ha Long City. The race is called the Ha Long Heritage Marathon, and while I'm not 100% sure on the route, I think most of it is along the coast on the edge of Ha Long Bay, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, I think, and a very famous tourist destination in Vietnam, one that is often called Guilin in the Sea. The half marathon is taking part 4 weeks and a day, I believe, before my marathon. So it should give me enough time to recover, although I don't plan on running it full out. In ideal circumstances, the weather would be okay, and I could try running it at marathon intensity to give me some idea of what time I can target in December. In reality, I might just use it as an opportunity to finally try and get under 90 minutes for the half marathon. This is the longest running target that I've had and been unable to achieve. Sorry, fussy baby break. So yeah, I might use this half marathon as the opportunity to finally knock off one of my, well, my longest standing running goal. Obviously, in an absolute fantasy world, I could try and go for 90 minutes whilst also running at my marathon tempo, but yeah, something tells me that I'm not going to be in 3-hour marathon shape. I'm certainly not planning to run it as fast as possible. Let's say I'm capable of 1:28, I'm still probably going to try and run a 1:29:59 or as close to as I can while keeping it safe. Because I would like to have a proper, full, dedicated training block in an attempt to get the best half marathon time I can in future. For now, I just want to get that target out of the back of my mind. I've already gone sub 20 for 5, sub 40 for 10, sub 3:30 for a marathon, which was sort of some of the big targets I started off on. Well, sub 40 for 10 was pipe dream when I started. But that 90 minutes for a half marathon is still there, just annoyingly. I think my PB is 1:33:30 or something along those lines. More for a lack of attempts or opportunities than really anything else. It's just never worked out that I've tried a half at a time when I'm at sort of peak fitness and in a position where I can and want to give it my all. So this half next month might be the closest I get to that. At the same time, the temperature might be mid to high 20s. It might be very windy along the coast. It might be a terrible opportunity. Either way, it's a race that looks like it's going to be fun to take part in. It should be a nice 2-day holiday, about an hour's drive away from us, so it's easy to get to. And it'll just be nice to take part in my first event in Vietnam. All right, that's it for this video. The main thing was just to say I have signed up for a marathon. It's the 15th of December. That's what I'm training towards at the moment. That's my current goal. I'm going to start putting up training log videos from, well, probably a couple of days after this goes out because everything's got on top of me and I've been procrastinating. So this one's been delayed. But yeah, this is now my current main running goal for the year. And as a bonus event, I should have a nice video of a fairly picturesque place and me running a half marathon to throw in before the main event. So hopefully I'll catch you all next time. And for now, I got to get back to running.